So I think it's probably about 20 or so years ago, I was in a class on modeling, which is trying to tease out how people do the things that they do well. And so in the class, we all talked about our abilities, and we would partner up with people who had abilities that we were interested in learning. And one of the people in the class was modeling another gentleman in the class who was really good at taking risks. And the person who was the modeler wanted to know how to take risks. You know, he looked at what this other guy was doing and was just amazed, like how could you take such, you know, bold risks in your life? And, you know, whenever we experience something that seems like it's a risk or a place where we experience fear, for me, that's a sign that there's new ground that can be broken. There's more of the world that I can explore. There's more capacity. So the first thing I try to do is I try to notice where are the places that I won't go. You know, where are the places where I pull back, or where fear stops me, or the idea of taking a risk, something being risky, stops me. Now, I'm not talking about doing something dangerous. So this whole conversation has to take place in an assumption of safety. But there are many things that we don't do because we perceive them as fearful or risky. And back to this modeling project, what was so interesting is this guy had the person being modeled had a list of things that he had done, he had accomplished, that seemed like they were huge risks, like starting incredibly large business ventures and changing fields, you know, going on sort of adventure vacations, you know, sort of like, you know, a Richard Branson type of atmosphere. But the interesting thing was that during the modeling process, one of the things that they discovered was, even though he did all these things, he didn't perceive them as risky. So from the outside, the person who was doing the modeling thought, wow, you're great at taking risks. And the person being modeled said, well, actually, it's not that I'm great at taking risks. I'm great at making sure that something isn't risky. So he would look at something and he would assume that there's a way of preparing the ground and testing things such that there's very little risk whatsoever. So even though he might do a really large business venture, he was really good at his due diligence. So he had a really high ability to make sure that the risk was minimal and the probability of success was incredibly high. And then I've mentioned before the guy, David Bell, who started parkour and does flips from one building to another building. And again, something that looks incredibly risky. And it is risky for most people to do that, you know, to jump off a staircase for most people, or even like one step, might be risky. You might be risking injury of some kind. And when I heard David Bell speak, the first thing he said was, he said, I never take a jump that I'm not completely confident that I can do. And he said, anything that you're seeing me do, I've done thousands of times, thousands and thousands of times. So he's aware of how risky something is, and he doesn't practice at a point of riskiness. He practices within safety and right at his edge. And I think that's one thing that I notice about both these people, is they're both incredibly good at making something safe and finding the edge where it's really useful to practice, where you can make the most progress. And I think a lot of people look at something that's risky and they don't try it. They just, they cross the other side of the street and they go on with their life. And or they look at something that's a very simple task to practice and they think, well, that's too simple or that's too small, so that won't lead to this place of jumping from one building to another building. But that jumping, or that big jump, both literally and metaphorically, comes from first jumping like 1 foot on the sidewalk or jumping over a puddle or something like that, and practicing it until you have a level of mastery, and then you can take on a bigger jump. And so what I recommend is first notice the places where you don't go, where something seems risky or fearful. 2, start to break it down and think of ways to practice it at a very minute scale. And 3, look at ways to make something as safe as possible. You want it to be just at the edge where it gets your attention, but not so much that it makes you nervous or sort of shuts you down, right? And practice right at that edge until that's easy and you can go on to the next step. So I encourage you to go out and break ground and take some new risks in this new year and enjoy that.